So this is our third session for Sysmac Studio webinars, and today we're going to be going over NA HMI programming. So Omron has 3 HMIs currently, NB, NS, and NA. NA is our latest and greatest. It's running Windows CE at the core, and it pairs very nicely with our NJ and our NX PLCs. So mostly today we will be discussing NA HMIs, and that's all we will be programming. So let's get going. A little agenda for the day. We're going to talk a little bit about the hardware on the screens, the software on the screens. Then we will dive into Sysmac. We'll add an HMI if you haven't already. Some of you may have accidentally not saved the program that we were working on last week. Don't worry if you haven't. We can make a new one and add an HMI, but if you still have it, we'll resume where we left off. We'll quickly go over pages and navigation. We'll discuss the variables, adding and removing them, naming, that sort of thing. We'll go over the simulator for the HMI. And then we will do VNC remote access. Now, you guys don't have HMIs in front of you, but I do. So I'll show you how to enable it, and I can demo it with my setup here. So HMIs come in 4 sizes. 7, 9, 12, and 15. The silver color is shown. We also have them in black. Down at the bottom of the screen here, we have function keys. So these are capacitive push buttons, and we can pair these to do anything we want, any function we want. We can have it run a script in the background. We can have it go to the home page. We can have it tied to a PLC variable and reset an alarm, that sort of thing. Or we can have them change depending on the page you're on. So we originally got rid of these on our last series, but they're back by popular demand. Our screens themselves are resistive, so glove friendly. Now, as far as the peripheral ports on our screens, you can see from left to right here, we've got a USB port. We can program with this port. This is the slave or the tool port. And you can see we have next to it 2 USB ports side by side. So these are essentially multi-purpose USB ports. We could put a flash drive in there to transfer a program. We could put a flash drive in there to log data to. We can plug a keyboard in there and a mouse and essentially control our HMI with a keyboard and a mouse. Next to that, we've got a 232 port, a serial port. We don't talk to PLCs with this port, but we can code some drivers to, read data from a barcode reader, stuff like that. It's not too commonly used. Our new PLCs don't come with serial on board, so Ethernet's kind of the way of the future with Omron, and we're just keeping serial there just in case, I think. To the right of that, we've got 2 Ethernet ports. So we can set these up to pass traffic through, or we can have these completely independent, isolated networks. Next to that, it's kind of hard to see in the picture here, but there's an SD card slot. So similar to putting a flash drive in the USB port, we can put a program on our SD card, transfer it that way. We can log data to our SD card. Next to that is our power connector. So our HMIs just take 24 volts DC. The software features on our HMI, it's running Windows CE at the core. So what's neat about this is it gives us all of the Windows CE media viewing capabilities. And I'll demo this once we go over the VNC part of it. I can show you guys, but we can open up a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet. We can play a movie. We can open up PDF if you wanted to put your panel drawings on your HMI, for example, because we all know how long they last in an actual panel. We've got automatic global variable linking. So if you guys remember on the first session, we dragged some contacts and coils out of our actual ladder logic and dropped them on our HMI. So because they're in the same project file, we can link up those variables automatically. And anytime we create a new variable, it will be essentially ready to use in the HMI. We just give it a name and it's good to go. We don't have to do any importing and exporting of variable spreadsheets. We do your typical HMI alarms, trends, history. We can save them to our flash drives or SD cards. As far as scripting goes, it runs .NET, kind of a Visual Basic type scripting, and I'll show you guys an example of this. We have VNC for remote access. So this is a free program that you can download on your phone or on your computer. It's iPhone friendly, Android friendly, PC friendly. I'll show you guys this as well. We have on our HMIs something called an NJ troubleshooter. So my background is systems integration, and I lost track of how many times I had to drive to site because there was a red light on the PLC. Traditionally, you would need a piece of software, the PLC's programming software, programming cable. You'd go there, you'd connect, and you'd see exactly what that error light meant. So we took the error log capabilities out of our Sysmac Studio software and we put them in our HMI, and we can actually run what's called an NJ troubleshooter on our HMI, and that will show you exactly what is causing that error in the PLC. And we do parallel task execution, speed things up a bit. So while we're still on this page, I'll show you guys the VNC section and a few of these software features, since we won't really be programming all of them in there. This is VNC Viewer. It's one of many flavors. VNC's been around for quite a while. I've got the Android version and the PC version. It's free. It's really easy to use. This is the IP address of the HMI I have in front of me here. So I have a password set up on it. You can set this up as view only or view and control. Mine is view and control. And this is the HMI I have in front of me. It essentially mirrors the screen. So if I change a page on VNC, it's going to change on the HMI and vice versa. So it's not a thin client, it's a mirror of the screen. So here we have an example of opening a PDF on the HMI. Looks just like your PDF viewer. We can do Word documents, spreadsheets, movies, pictures, that sort of thing. So the troubleshooter, let me just go into the system screen here. So this is the screen that you access by double tapping on the corner. That's how we do it on this particular HMI. I know some of the other HMIs out there, you've got to, hold two corners. You've got a triple tap in one and single tap in the other. They're all a bit different, but with us, it's a double tap in the corner. And we have what's called the NJ NX troubleshooter. So in Sysmac Studio, this would be identical to the interface you would have connected online with the PLC looking at your faults. This program standalone, there isn't a PLC in the project file, so nothing is showing up here, but it would be identical to the actual Sysmac Studio programming software. What's nice about it is you can also clear the fault, reset the fault, if it's resettable and cleared, of course. Okay, so everyone can open up their Sysmac Studio. Does everyone have their, or actually, let me rephrase that. Does anybody not have their project file from last week that we were working on? Should just have a PLC and an HMI in there. A couple cards.
I have the controller from the first session, but I had to miss the second session.
Okay, no problem. We really didn't do much on the HMI. So what I'll get you to do is if you just right click on your PLC here, choose add device. You can choose an HMI and just throw a 12W101 V1 on there. And the version doesn't matter. And then click OK, and you'll now have a drop down next to your controller here, so you can choose between your PLC and your HMI. So if everyone can select their HMI, we can quickly walk through our multi-view explorer in the HMI. And you probably already noticed that our toolbox has changed to HMI related items buttons, lamps, switches, that sort of thing. So enter Multi-View Explorer.
I'm sorry to interrupt there, Stuart. Could you
No
just
problem.
repeat one more time? What's the device I'm adding?
Oh, just and
Change
I went
change
to
device.
I went to
Sorry.
change because mine is already there. So
Okay.
if you haven't added one, just go to Add Device.
Okay, I have an NX102. What do I change it to?
No, so close out of that. You want to keep your NX102, and you'll want to add a device. I went to change just because I'd already added mine.
Okay.
So if you go up here,
Add, yeah.
yeah, we'll choose HMI from the dropdown, and then you can choose the 12, either one, the V1 or the regular one, doesn't matter for this. And version doesn't matter either. So hit OK, and that should add one to your project.
Thank you. Sorry to hold you up.
No, it's no problem. And if you just click the drop down here, you can select your NA screen that you added. Okay, so we'll start from top to bottom on the HMI here. So we've got variable mapping. So this is what gets automatically updated anytime that you're working in your PLC and you add a global variable. So you guys don't have to play along with this, but I'll just demonstrate it. So if I go into my PLC tags, I make a new variable, and I just call this new var 234. I go back to my HMI, variable mapping, expand everything. My new var 1234 is automatically there. So any global variable in your PLC is going to be exposed to your HMI. Now we can call it whatever we want, or just like our IO map variables, if you guys remember from last week, we can auto assign a name for it. So there's create device variable, and it gives it a PLC name underscore tag name type variable. So new controller 0, tag name. We can also do a prefix, and if we wanted to call this something, I would say we had, you know, 2 identical pump houses, we could call this pump house 1. And it's going to append that to the beginning. Or you can just freehand type whatever you want if you've got some strange variable naming conventions for your project. I'm going to, and you guys can now play along with this as well. I'm actually going to delete a few of these. These ones had names on them because these are the ones that we dragged and dropped from our ladder logic. So I'm just going to delete these ones and all the examples I made. I'm going to name all of these with a prefix, and I'm just going to delete that, or you could also say none here, and that would do the same thing. And hit OK, and now my PLC tags are identical to my HMI tags. That's just a bit easier to work with. One thing to remember here, though, is when you add a variable in your PLC, you do have to go back and give it a tag name in your HMI. So I go back to my global variables in my HMI. Oops, here. The only one without a name is the one that I just added. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's how we get our variables into our HMI. Now, if we had multiple PLCs in this project, there would be multiple PLCs listed here, but there's only one at this IP address, but we could have, you know, 15 PLCs in here if we wanted to. And that's where you'd want to use a prefix, especially if it was, you know, a skid based or an assembly line based, you know, a lot of identical PLCs in there. So we go into our HMI settings here, the next item down. A lot of these are going to be familiar to many of you. Startup page, languages. I'm going to disable that because I'll probably put this on an actual HMI. Here we have our Ethernet settings. So we've got two Ethernet ports. Port 1 defaults to 250.2, I believe. Is that what you guys have on yours, 250.2?
Yep, that's what I've got.
Okay. And port 2 is defaulted to direct connection with Sysmac Studio. So if you guys remember from last week, we have the ability to do a direct connection. So if you don't know the IP address of something, you can do what's called a direct connection. This one here. So you can do it with the HMIs as well. And port 2 by default is strictly for a direct connection with Sysmac Studio. But if you want, you can change that to whatever IP address you want and have it behave just like port 1. Okay, FTP. So with our HMIs, we can FTP into them and we can grab some data logs if we want, or transfer some applications, that sort of thing. NTP, same as the PLC. FINS, this is if you wanted to talk to some of our older controllers. And VNC is where you will enable what I was showing you earlier, the remote viewer functionality here. So by default, it's disabled. To use it, you simply select that radio button, you choose a mode, either view only or view and operate, and you give it a password. We can use what's called registered client login if security is a bit of a concern. So if I only wanted, my operator logging in, I could, excuse me, I could enable registered client logon, and I could set it up so only his IP address and only the MAC address of his company laptop can access the VNC. Now, if we go to security settings, the next one down, this should be pretty familiar to most of you too. There's nothing too particular about the way we implement security. It is user-based and role-based. So you can see by default, there's an administrator account and his role is administrator. Down below, we control the administrator role, what levels he has access to. We can add a role, we can give it any level that we want. So programmer, I'll give him every level of access. Now, if I made a new user, I would give him the role of programmer, and he would inherit all the permissions and access levels from the programmer role. So that's how we do our security. And then these levels here, we will actually specify on the HMI when we're developing it. To access this page, you need to be level 4. To toggle this button, you need to be level 5, that sort of thing. Okay, so this is where we set up the troubleshooter. By default, it is in the system screen. You double tap on the corner to get to it, but we can set it up to actually have a button on maybe one of the menu screens to access it if you need to, or you could have it only available if there is a fault on the PLC. You can have it as a pop-up, that sort of thing. Language settings and operation settings. Being Windows, we have different font and language packages that we can add to this with standard Windows font files. So this happens to be going to overseas somewhere, we can load a Windows font for Mandarin, anything, anywhere it's going, we can just take that font file, the same one we load into our PC, and we can use it in the HMI. So that's essentially our configurations and setup part of it. And down below it is the HMI category. So here's where we do the majority of our programming. By default, we'll have page 0. So if you guys want to double click on that, some of you may have a some buttons and some indicator lights that we were playing around with last week. You can just highlight those and delete them. If you guys remember, in the PLC programming environment, we had one contact and we had one coil, and depending on what you selected it to do would determine its function. So you'd right click on a contact and you could choose normally open, normally closed, one shot up, one shot down. On our HMIs, we have one button. Well, a few technically. Button and momentary button just determines whether it's toggled or whether it's a momentary. So if we drag and drop a momentary button onto our workspace here, we need to go up to View, Events and Actions, which is down here. And now when we click on the button, our Events and Actions tab is open. We can scroll between our toolbox, the properties, and Events and Actions. Properties is where you choose what the button says, the color the button is, any variable that it's tied to. Events and Actions is where we determine what happens when we press it or release it. So we'll add an event on the press, and the action will be, we don't have any other pages, so let's just come back to that after we've added some pages, and we can make that a navigation button. But that's the idea. We can click back on that. We can do any of these things you see in the drop-down list here with one button instead of having a button for every single one of them. So if we go to our pages now, we can add another page. If we want to navigate to that page now, we'll go back to our momentary button. And when we press it, we're going to choose Show Page. If we start typing the page that we added, which is page 1, it should start to autofill for you. And that is one of our actions for that button. And we can add multiple events to the button. If we wanted to, we can have one on pressing, one on releasing, one on click. Not too sure what the difference is there, but to edit the text on the button, we can go to our Properties tab, or you can just click on the actual text on the button, and we can call this page 1, since our pages started 0. But this will just be an example here. So I'm going to run this in the simulator, just make sure my page navigation works. Looking for a variable. Nope, here it is. Mine keeps popping up in the other monitor. So page 1 is blank, so this goes to page 1. It should be blank. Goes to page 1, no problem. Okay, so I'll get everybody to add 3 new pages to their project. So we have 4 total. Back in our PLC, does everybody have this logic still in their PLC? Our start-stop circuit and our fail to start alarm and our runtime timer. Does anybody not have it, I should say? Just let me know in the chat. I can give you a minute or two to copy it off mine here. Okay, good. So I'm going to make an actual HMI alarm for my motor fail to start bit here. So I'm going to go back to my HMI, and in our section called user alarms, we have group 0. So if we double click on group 0, there's a button down here that says add, and we can give the alarm a name. This isn't the variable name. This is what we're actually going to be calling the alarm. So we'll call it motor failed to start. And this is what's going to show up in your alarm banner, in your alarm history, that sort of thing. So you can be a bit more descriptive here than you can in your tag name. There's far fewer naming restrictions in the alarm name. So alarm ID is simply what group this belongs to. Alarm code, we don't have to worry about for this. And now expression, this is where we're going to tie it to that actual variable. So if we start typing our motor fail to start, we can find it pretty easily. So we'll select that. And we can give it now a priority. So anywhere from 1 to 8, 8 being very, very low priority, 1 being your plant's about to explode. We also have a category called information level. So you could call it level 9 if you wanted to. Very low priority. Now the message, this is where you type what you actually want to say when this alarm happens on the alarm banner. So say pump 1, 2, 3 to start overload. Not happy with my name here. I'm just seeing why. Oh, it looks like I need underscores, not spaces. Okay. Now we can have this alarm be a pop-up, and we can have it require acknowledgement, and we can also have it automatically navigate us to a page. So we'll leave it as a pop-up for now. We'll require acknowledgement, and we can have it bring us to page, let's go with page 3. And that's our first alarm. So we will need to add a few things to the PLC here to make this demo a bit more interactive and sensical. So if we go back to our PLC programming environment, you may remember that we just made this a set instruction. And if we wanted to actually clear that alarm, we should make a reset instruction for it as well. So we'll quickly do that. As many of you know, when you're making an HMI and a PLC at the same time, there's quite a bit of bouncing in between them. So we're going to be doing a lot of that. So I'm going to add a rung below the fail to start bit rung. And it's going to say, if we have the fail to start alarm, we aren't trying to start the motor, which would be this bit here. And we'll need to make a new bit here, an alarm reset, and we can use this over and over again in our code. Call it alarm reset. Make it a global. Very important if you want to use it on your HMI. Then we can, I'm just going to paste this and change it to a reset instruction. And that's how we'll clear our motor failed to start alarm. Does anyone remember what we have to do when we make a new variable and we want it on the HMI? Quite a bunch. We go back into our variable mapping, user variables, and we need to give it a variable name that the HMI can use. I'm going to create it with no prefix, so it's identical to the PLC. Now we can use it on our HMI. So you guys remembered whenever the pump failed to start alarm happened, we navigate to page 3. So on page 3, we can add a button to reset that failed to start alarm. So if we go into our buttons, we'll add a, let's go with a momentary button. Actually, why not a reset button? It's an alarm reset, so we'll drag a reset button out there.
Hey, Stu?
Yes.
Hey, Stuart.
If you could just quick second go back to the logic just to kind of revisit how you wrote that.
Sure.
Cruising through this.
This rung here.
Everybody good with that line of code there? Or logic rung? Just a quick sec here, Stu.
How'd you get the reset?
Oh, if you right click on the actual output, and then there's a set or reset toggle.
Okay, perfect.
All right, good to go. Thanks, Stu.
Not a problem. If anyone needs me to slow down, don't be afraid to speak up. Okay, so what we did after that is we went into our variable mapping here. And if you haven't already, your alarm reset won't have a variable at the end of it. So you can create a device variable with a prefix and just choose none as your prefix. So since our failed to start alarm, if you guys remember, brings us to page 3, we're going to go to page 3 and add a reset button. Actually, you know what, that would be to, now if we wanted to reset that failed to start bit directly, we could use this, but since our tag that we made is turned on to reset it, let's not use the reset button. We can just click it, delete it, go back to our toolbox, and let's just use a standard momentary button. We double click on our momentary button, we can change the text to set alarm. Set alarms, I can probably reuse this if we make another alarm. This anywhere we want. I'm going to make it really big, put it right in the middle of the screen, because this page is strictly going to be for alarms, so I don't need to free up the real estate. I wouldn't actually do this if I was going to use this in a real life plant. But over here on the properties, you can, well, everything is pretty self-explanatory. We've got our font, we've got our size. That's obviously pretty small compared to the button, so I can bump that up to 50, say. That looks a bit better. Color, if I wanted to change the color, I could. Background, foreground, I can do shading, that sort of thing. It's probably pretty familiar to most of you guys. Now we need to give it an action. So I believe in the momentary by default, you can give it a variable, or we can specify click, press, release. For an alarm reset button, I'm just going to use the default variable that it takes. So we start typing the new variable that we created. Should find it pretty quick. Alarm reset. And there's our reset alarm button. So how this should work is we get a pop-up when that alarm happens. We go to page 3 automatically, where we have this button and we can reset the alarm. What we're going to add next is it's called a user alarms viewer. So if you go to your toolbox and HMI controls, you could also type alarm if you weren't sure what it was, and it brings that up. So this is essentially your alarm banner. So we can drag this out onto our page and just size it so it takes up most of the screen. When we double click on this, it brings up the properties, and we need to, I guess we don't need to customize it. It essentially has 2 modes. So active mode and historical mode. Historical mode would be your alarm history. Active mode is the default, and that would tell you any current alarms. So to change it, that would be this historical mode here. We're just going to leave it as active alarms. And you can change the color if you have a color scheme that you want for unacknowledged alarms, acknowledged alarms, and background, foreground, that sort of thing. But this is going to automatically grab alarms from your alarm group and display them there. So now what we'll do is test our alarm and how the alarm functionality works. So we can go up to our simulator, and we run it with a controller simulator this time. Actually, let me pause there. Does anybody need a second to catch up, or did anybody get stuck somewhere? Okay. So I'm going to navigate to my PLC code in order to simulate the alarm, and my virtual HMI should pop up. There it is. Mine pops up on my other monitor, so I have to drag it over. But you can see by default we're on page 0, and when we trip that alarm, if everything goes as planned, it should bring us to page 3. So the easiest way will just be to right-click on the fail to start bit, because we tested this alarm last week, and we can simply just set the alarm. And on our HMI, we've got a pop-up. Pump 123 failed to start, check the overload. That's the message that we typed in. And it didn't bring us to page 3, so that's interesting. What we can do is manually go there. If you guys go up to the top left corner, there's a sort of a checker box looking object. If you click on it and expand your pages, you can manually go to page 3. Now you can see here, you've got your active alarms, your alarm message, and we can also test the reset alarms button here while looking at our ladder logic behind it. And that worked. Our active alarm went away. Now, if this were a historical alarm display box, then as soon as we actually cleared that alarm, then it would be displayed and it would show the time that it was active and the time that it was cleared. So we can close out of our simulator and it should stop the PLC simulator. Let's go back to our HMI. Data logging, I'll show you how to do it, but on the simulator, it doesn't work. There are a few things you can't do on the simulator, and data logging is one of them, for the HMI at least. But for data logging, we need to add what's called a data set. And if we go into that data set, we specify a few parameters. So where are we logging this? Either the USB drive or the SD memory card. What do we want the file to be called? How often do we want to update this every interval, or do we want it updated on a condition? So if you were only concerned about logging data when your plant was in a certain sequence, then you could have it update on a condition and save some memory on your flash drive or your SD card. You can give it an update rate as low as 500 milliseconds and as high as 1 week. And you control how frequently you start a new file. So it can be dependent on how many entries are in it. It can be dependent on how many days or hours, or just do it daily. Now within here, we would add any tags that we wanted in our data log file. You guys don't have to do this. You can kind of just see how it works. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to add a few tags. It's going to detect the data type, that sort of thing. And now when I go into, when I were to start this application, it would automatically start this data log and it will run in the background, assuming it's on a regular interval. Or if it were on a condition, it would start logging as soon as that condition was met. And I can pull the data logs off that flash drive or that SD card when I want to see them. So pretty straightforward data logging. But again, it's something that won't work in the simulator. But we will leave that data set there. Actually, no, I told you guys not to do it, so don't worry about it. To view the actual data logs, we use what's called a broken line graph or a trend graph. I recommend trend graph. So if we drag and drop that out there, double click on it, here's where we tell it the data set that we made. So we made data set 0. If we just start typing data set 0, it's going to find it. And now you tell it how many analog and how many digital traces you want to pull from that data set. So let's see, I had 1 digital variable in there. Boolean is the data type. So my trend graph properties, I've told it data set 0, and I'll add a digital trace. And I think it was, yeah, new var 1, 2, 3, 4. You can give it a color. And can have up to 16 variables being displayed on this trend graph at any given time. multiple trend graphs on your application if you want to display different data. So that's trending in a nutshell. Again, I apologize we can't do it with the simulator, so there's not a huge point in getting you guys to do this. I can just leave that there, that's fine. Okay, so now what we'll do is add a, see, we should do we'll do a PDF onto our HMI. This would be a good one just to have as an example. So I'll make some room here. So we go back to our toolbox, go to our buttons, and we can just add a plain button for this one. Drag and drop it out. And this is where we'll go into events and actions. And we can do the event of press. Now in our action, we are going to show document. We can do it in a window and relocate it if we need to, or we can do it full screen. So we'll show document full screen in this case. Now here, document file name, this will let you choose a document off your PC. So it says all supported document types. So that's PDF, doc, docx, or Microsoft Excel, spreadsheet, XLS format. And you can pick anything off of here. And as soon as you choose this document or PDF or spreadsheet, or if you were playing a media file, it's going to actually save a copy of that document or a copy of that movie with your project. So if I were to export this project and email it to Chase, that video would be tied to it. We don't have to send a copy of the video and have him relink it once he gets it. Then we can see if we go down here to resources and route, exactly what is tagging along with our project. So here is document 0 that I selected, and this will send an actual copy of this document if you were to export this and send it to somebody. So
Hey Stu, does that mean that HMI files can get relatively large then if you're linking everything within it?
definitely. Yep. As a good example of that, I think I have one that is very big. Okay, so here's one I have on my desktop that's almost 200 megabytes in size because there are some videos in it. And it's, when it gets this big, it actually surpasses not the memory limits, but there's, and let me show you guys here. I'm just gonna go online. You guys without an actual HMI won't be able to see this, but it's something to keep in mind, which is why I'm going to show you. I need to go to the synchronize menu to show you. Oh, I've got a different HMI here. let me go to this one. So this is a very big project that I have on there as an example. When I hit synchronize, I'll just resynchronize the whole project. It's going to give me this error. There's not enough user space on the device. So when we transfer our projects over, we actually send two copies. We send the machine language version of it, so a ready-to-go application that the NA can understand, and we send essentially the exported Sysmac Studio project so that down the road, if you lose the project or if somebody else comes into this plant to work on this HMI, they can transfer that project from the HMI and they'll have a working copy of it that they can decompile and have an identical version of the project. So that takes up half the memory, and the machine code portion takes up half the memory. So if I wanted to transfer this project that was bigger than half of the memory, I need to actually uncheck, store the HMI project source code on the NA device, and then it will let me transfer this to the HMI. But I can no longer upload from the HMI because I needed more than half the memory just for the project source code. So, and as you can see, this is taking quite a while because it has movies and tons of scripting, that sort of thing. So what HMIs are you guys mostly familiar with? You can just type in chat.
Yeah, that's a good one. Whose HMIs do you guys typically work with? Is it yeah, Rockwell or Siemens, Schneider? Yeah, I see Rockwell from Brent, Rockwell from Pat, Schneider from Brent. Glad there's not any Automation Direct products on there. Some Seymours. Brent, how do you find working with Delta V? Is it difficult to utilize, or do they make things easy?
It's probably the most user-friendly control system I've worked with.
Oh, that's good to hear. Especially
We were
for
able
something
to,
with so much capability.
yeah, we were able to pick it up on our own without any formal training. I have had the formal training since, but turned out knew more than we gave ourselves credit for.
Yeah, VT SCADA, Rockwell, Bayer, Proface, Horner, Wonderware from Kevin. So got a lot of good experience throughout here in this party. So
Yeah, definitely a lot of Rockwell in there for sure. Well, I believe most of those support a scripting language of some kind. Now in the Omron world, our scripting language is, well, it's easiest to just show you. It's kind of a .NET, similar to Visual Basic. This is a different project I opened up. You guys won't have it, but what's nice about it is very powerful. So it lets us access certain things fairly deep in the system. This particular snippet of code here will actually run a third-party web browser on our HMI. So mobile applications for Windows CE, some of them we can actually run on our HMI. Chase and I have played around with this a little bit. It's called ZK browser. It's for Windows CE devices, and it runs on our HMI. There are a number of applications, both by Microsoft and by third parties, that we can run on our HMIs just by drilling down to the actual file location and starting the process. So that's our scripting.
Can you give an example of where that would be useful?
A web browser?
Well,
Or
can you just give an
scripting.
example of when we would need to do that? Like something in particular with the web browser?
Well, this one specifically, it was for a gas monitoring application. So they were using a Honeywell Touchpoint Plus gas monitoring system, and they wanted to have a kind of an access point to view. So the Honeywell Touchpoint Plus could host its screens through a web browser. So they just wanted to basically mirror this with an HMI screen of some sort. And this was kind of something that we came up with to open the web browser and access that third-party web solution.
Yeah, and Adam, I mean,
Okay.
who doesn't like scrolling through Facebook while you're on the clock in your plant too? Come on, man.
Exactly. Yeah. Toss a couple YouTube videos on there.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of things have web interfaces, and you can do anything you'd want with web browser just on your NA screen. Like I said, this isn't an Omron app, this ZK browser that we're using. That's just something that we tried. But yeah, it's a pretty powerful.
Okay, but you can access pretty much any internet site on the HMI then, you're saying?
I'll say most of them. If it's got this particular browser program we're using didn't support, it doesn't support all of the, the Flash apps and more in-depth, high-end web plugins and stuff like that. But it's just mostly just for HTML. But it depends on the actual browser app that you're using. Again, this isn't an Omron program, so I can't really speak to the functionality and capabilities of it. That's just from my experience. It does most web pages, but not all of them. So depends, right? Okay, so that is 2 o'clock. Let's take 5 minutes there. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Go get a drink of water, take a bathroom break, whatever you need to do. We'll come back at 2:05 and resume. Okay, so that's about 5 minutes there. We'll get back to it. So up until now, we've dealt primarily with Boolean data, binary data. What we'll do now is work with some numerical data. So we'll create a variable on our PLC that isn't a Boolean for a change, and we can bring that onto our HMI. So this time when we add it, we'll go into our global variables first and add it. Prior to this, we were just creating it on the fly in our ladder logic, but we can actually create it, and you've probably seen me do it, in our global variables. So to go back to our PLC from our drop down here, down to the bottom, global variables, and right click anywhere in there, create new, or press insert. So our variable is going to be, I will just call it number underscore int, and we'll give it a data type of int. I'm sure you guessed. Now we'll go back to our HMI. The tab is still open at the top, but if you accidentally closed it and you needed to get back to it, you would kind of go the roundabout way through your Multi-View Explorer. But if we just click up on the tab, it does keep them open, kind of like the web browser would. So we want to go to variable mapping in our HMI, go to new controller, user variables, and you'll see our new integer variable there. So I'm going to right click it, create the device variable with a prefix, choose none, and we've got number underscore int available to us in the HMI. So let's go to page 1, sorry, page 0, the first page we added. And we can move anything we've been playing with out of the way and add a new button to our project, just a plain button. Actually, momentary button. This will work better for this. So we'll drag and drop a momentary button. We'll double click on it and we will call it add 10, just ADD 10. Go back to our toolbox. We're going to add a standard controls data display. Can drag and drop that out onto our project. It is really small by default, so I'm going to make the font size a little bigger on it. So if I double click on it, it opens up the properties, and I can go up to font, expand that a little bit, and I can make it say, let's try 25. Yeah, that's pretty good. Stick with 25. And now down here in properties, we've got expression. This is the variable. So to start typing the new variable we created, that was number underscore int. There it is. It found it. Hit enter. Hit enter again. Now this is going to display the value of the integer variable we created in our PLC. If this were a floating point value or a floating point variable, a real or a float, then we could determine how many decimal places. If we had any special scaling for it, we could enter that there, divide it by 10, multiply it by 10, that sort of thing. So we'll drag this into the middle somewhere. We'll put add 10 on one side. Just going to shrink this down a little bit. And then on this add 10 button, if you click on it and go down to events and actions, we're going to add an action on press. And it is going to be increase variable we're going to choose for this. When it asks us for the variable, it's going to be that number underscore int variable that we're displaying. And the value we're going to increase it by will be 10. Cut and paste this add 10 button. Control C, Control V, or edit, copy paste. I'm going to make a subtract 10 or sub 10, I'll call it. Everything is identical in this. So if I go to my events and actions with sub 10 selected, I am still increasing this in variable by 10. So there's a little garbage can next to this action that I added that says delete when you mouse over it. So I can delete that. I can add instead of increase variable, it's going to be decrease variable. We'll choose the same variable, number underscore int. I'll decrease it by the same value, 10. Now the value of my variable will be displayed in between these two buttons. If I want to increase it by 10, I hit the add 10 button. If I want to decrease it by 10, I hit the subtract 10 button. Now, of course, we are going to simulate it to make sure it works. Anybody miss a step there before we simulate it?
Did you set a value for the variable to start off as, or do you have to do that, sir?
You don't have to, no. If you don't specify it and it's not retained, then it's going to be 0 when your simulator starts. But that's a good point. If I wanted that variable to be retained or have a starting value, then I could specify it in my global variables here. Where is it? Number int. So it has some options here. I could make it retentive, so it's just going to have the last value before the PLC turned off, or I could give it an initial value. So no matter what it was, whenever the PLC first turns on or you first go into run mode, it's going to get this initial value. So I don't know, I'll make mine 50 just to kind of show what I mean by that. You guys don't have to do that.
So every time the PLC boots up, it's going to have that value placed to it, even if it has the retain box checked from last time?
Yes, that will override retained.
Well, what if you just wanted to set it once, like that value, while it gets set up, and then every other time the controller cycles, you just wanted to retain that value? How would you do that?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Like if you basically want to set that initial value to 50, but then you only want to set it so that's its initial value when the program starts, like the first time you set it up. Then every time you just want it to retain the new value as you go. You don't want it to go back to 50 every time you cycle it.
You would just force that.
You're saying that if you have the
yeah, so you would. I think that's what Chase was trying to say. That you would just make it retentive, and you would just manually type 50, and then it's
okay.
It's not 50 when it goes to site, and then whatever they set it to is just going to be what it stays with. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So if you haven't started your simulator, go to simulator and run with controller simulator. So mine popped up over here. So you can see my initial value is 50. Now if I add 10 to it or decrease it by 10, we can see the number change. Now if I were to cycle power on this because I had an initial value, it's going to go back to 50. If I instead had it set as retained instead of giving it initial value, it's going to have 200 or whatever I leave it at when I shut down. It's going to keep that value, and then it's going to be there on startup. Okay. Anybody having any problems with their simulator or their value not incrementing or decrementing? I'll take that as everyone's on track. So up until this point, we have been using strictly variables that are on the PLC, but we can make variables that are just on the HMI as well. One recent application I was working on where I had to do this was the HMI needed basically a watchdog timer. So I made a script and I made a few variables on the HMI to essentially have a watchdog timer go to a certain page when it would lose communication with the PLC. I could have that internal variable trigger an alarm, just like I could have a PLC variable trigger an alarm. So we'll do this exact same +10, -10 setup, but we're going to instead use a HMI variable instead of a PLC variable. So if we highlight all of our buttons and numeric display items here and just cut and paste it, that would be the easiest way to do it. But we first need to create a variable before we change too much on here. So if we go to variable mapping, actually, No, it's no, I think here. Trying to remember where it is. Data, just the same place it is on your PLC. So if we go to the global variables down in our HMI menu, you can see all the ones from our PLC, and you can see they're located at new controller. Now, if we were to just make a new one here, just like we would in our global variables in our PLC, we'll do the same thing here. We'll call it HMI underscore int. Now, this is where our data types get a little confusing because we're running Windows CE and we're using Windows CE data types, whereas in our PLC we're using IEC 611 data types. So same data type, but the naming's a bit different. You probably noticed here this number int is the short data type, which in the PLC world, that's often a byte. So I'm just going to make this short, which is an integer in the PLC. Most of them match up, but there are a few that don't, and integer is one of them. So let's go back to page 0. And we're going to go to both of our buttons and our numeric display. And we're just going to change that variable to the HMI variable instead of the PLC variable. So you start typing, you did everything correct, it should auto-populate. Pause there for a bit, let everything catch up.
So is that variable only in the HMI? Because you created it in the global variables section.
Of the HMI, yes. The PLC has global variables section, and the HMI has a global variables section.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, we couldn't access that variable with the PLC. It's just contained within the HMI. They're not commonly used, but they are useful, and they definitely do get used. Like I said, that watchdog timer I made was a good example of that. This is actually the code for it here. Basically, there's a local variable to the HMI here, which is this one here. And we're also looking at a value in the PLC. And basically, we're looking for a change in that value in the PLC. If we don't see that value change, that means we've lost connection. If it happens more than 5 times, that means we've been down for 5 seconds. And we will trip this watchdog tripped bit. But this couldn't be accomplished without an internal variable in the HMI. So if everyone is up to speed here, we can run our simulator again with the controller. Because I didn't give it an initial value, mine starts out at 0, but it behaves just like it's a PLC variable, only it's internal to the HMI. So you don't use them too often, but when you do use them, they are handy. anyone's having any issues or missed a step, just type in the chat. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll utilize the 3 function keys, they're called, which are the 3 buttons at the bottom of the HMI. So we can do a number of things with those buttons. We can have them change on each page we're on, or we can have them globally tied to an address in the PLC or an address in the HMI. I should say variable, we're not an address-based platform. If we were looking to do it on a page, we would just right-click on the background of a page, go to the properties. Trying to think where that is here. Events and actions. And here we have F1 key press, F2 key press, F3 key press. So these are the 3 function keys on the bottom of the HMI. I'll show you a picture here to show you what I'm talking about.
So every page has a different function. So if you wanted like the far left one to always do an action, you have to specify it on each page.
If you wanted a unique action in each page, you would. But if you wanted it to be the same on every page, then we would specify it somewhere else.
Okay, fair enough.
So page specific, we specify that events and actions of that page. Now globally, like Chase was hinting at, we will do global events over here on the left. And now globally, no matter where we are, if we were to do the F1 key or the F2 key, we could have it perform an action. So what we'll do in the global events section here, so it's under HMI global events, we'll add an F1 key press, and we'll do an action that will be, let's go with the set variable, and then we'll make this our alarm reset no matter what page we're on. So I believe that was called alarm reset, and value will be 1 because it's just a Boolean. So no matter what page we're on, because we declared this globally, that function key will reset our alarms. And we can do all 3 of them if we want. So let's mirror those increment and decrement functions with F2 and F3. So let's add our F2 key as a decrease variable. We'll go with the PLC. Yes.
Brent said that he had no drop-down lists for his page 0 events and actions.
So you were on page 0. You clicked on the background of the page, went to the events and actions tab, and there weren't any events here.
Yeah, I just did it now and there are. I don't know what's different. I did exactly the same thing again, I thought. But last time nothing popped up, now they are. So sorry, I don't know what's different this time.
That's all right. If you might have clicked on something, because that will change what the drop downs are.
Oh, okay, at the top it said page 0. Oh no, the title at the top changes if I click on something else. It said page 0. But anyway, I don't want to waste everyone's time. It's working now. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go into global events for the next one here. Give everyone a second to catch up, copy mine there. Okay, so now when we simulate it, there will be virtual function keys at the bottom of our screen. So we'll run our simulator with the PLC. We'll choose our PLC. There's only one. As you can see here, we've got our virtual function keys down at the bottom. So now when we press them, we're doing the same action that our on-screen buttons are doing, just we're pressing the function keys, and we can do that on any page we're on, and it's going to increment and decrement that variable. If you guys want to test the alarm reset, you can go into your PLC logic, trigger your fail to start, and just make sure the alarm reset works. And it works. So now, as our last activity, I'm going to issue a challenge to everyone here. Who can tell me what has priority, the global usage of those function buttons, so the ones we declared in here, or page specific? So if we were to make an event for those function keys locally, essentially, which has priority, and you can find this out with the simulator. So test that and take your answer. Is it the global events, or is it the page specific events that have priority?
Got a response from Chris and Brent here, page specific.
Correct. And how did you test that? I'll go with Brent, because I know your mic works. How'd you test that, Brent?
I went to page 0 and put in the events and actions for an F3 key press, and I put number int to be 5 instead of 10. So when I first started pressing it, I got increases of 5 instead of 10. But then I played around and the subtract 10 worked. But then when I hit the add 10, oh, no, sorry, my bad. It's the I forgot it's the F3. Yep, the F3 still works. Yeah, I set it on the page 0 properties action events for an F3 key press.
Good. So yeah, this our official training on the NA HMI is 3 days long, and we had about an hour and a half to do it. So we've really just scratched the surface of this stuff. Is there anything you guys want to see specifically? I don't mind staying on for a little bit here. If you guys got to take off, I understand. But yeah, if there's anything you want to see, or if you're curious about capabilities wise, by all means, speak up. Otherwise, if you got to go, you can go. In hindsight, I'm thinking we maybe should have made these a bit longer, but yeah, time is money.
It's a good takeaway for next time. 2.5 hours. We'll take everybody's afternoons up. Yeah, are there any features or anything that you guys constantly use on other platforms that maybe you'd like to see or question if we have the capability to do that?
So we did communication between the Rockwell PLC and the Omron PLC. What about the Omron HMI to a Rockwell PLC?
Great question.
Is that a pretty similar setup or link up?
I'll let Stu answer that.
Yeah, so the NA screens do Omron PLCs only. If you wanted to do direct from an Omron or an NA HMI, I should say, NA HMI only, you couldn't do it with a Rockwell PLC. We have other screens that have quite a few third-party drivers, even Rockwell's DF1, but the NA is currently at least Omron PLC specific.
Okay.
Okay, well, if nobody else
Well,
has
this
any
is probably a good place to wrap up. Thanks everybody for attending, and see you next week.